So I have a master's degree in business, and today I'm going to use it to analyze the marketing strategy of Kamala Harris's campaign, and ultimately why I believe if she continues with the horrible marketing strategy she has been employing, why she will ultimately end up losing the presidency to Donald Trump. So obviously this is a highly emotional and contentious topic for a lot of people, but the reason why I did want to speak on it is that I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between the marketing of a product and the marketing of a political candidate. I wish that wasn't the case, because I wish that politics was less of an exercise in personal branding and more of a deeper discussion on substantive policies that will actually be impacting the everyday lives of human beings. That just simply is not the case. And although I'm not American, I am Canadian. Your elections have consequences for the entire world, so I think anybody that wants to put their 2 cents in is allowed to. So based on my objective analysis, I believe that Kamala Harris's campaign is built upon very flawed marketing strategy that is very heavily relying on superficial social media engagement, identity politics, and a highly crafted and tightly controlled public image of her persona that is so far removed from the reality of who she is, and so socially and media engineered to the point that it is essentially a house of cards that is doomed to collapse. So the first marketing strategy that Kamala Harris is employing, and we are all collectively experiencing it whether we realize it or not, is the blank slate strategy. This is essentially where she is being intentionally vague and ambiguous in the language that she uses and the way that she appears publicly in order to take advantage of the psychological phenomenon of projection. Because if you are extremely vague and generic and say some of the right words without specifically committing to policies or being very clear about what your values are, human beings will simply project onto you what they want to see. Progressives will see her as extremely progressive and forward-thinking. More moderate voters will see her as somebody that's a little bit more measured, and you can kind of see reasoning behind why they're doing it. I don't think it's completely stupid, but I think it is doomed to fail, because although it is working in the short term, she's going to eventually be put into scenarios like debates where she will be forced to take firm stances on topics, and because she hasn't done that intellectual work to decide where she really lands on these important issues, she may end up looking unqualified for the job. So the next issue with the blank slate strategy is the only reason it's even remotely effective is specifically because she is solely relying on identity politics. And although I completely understand and respect the excitement associated with nominating the first woman president, the first black woman president, the first South Asian American black woman president, and that's something that is exciting and something that will understandably galvanize a certain demographic of the population that will vote for her solely based on that alone. I do not believe it is a substitute for an actionable policy platform that will actually impact the lives of the American people, because people are currently suffering economically and they want to understand and feel secure in the fact that you have a plan to ameliorate their suffering. So it seems like her campaign is relying on the sole fact that people will be so excited to vote for the first black woman that they will be willing to overlook the fact that she doesn't have a true vision for the country. I do not believe that is something that should be relied upon, especially in the context of the United States, where the election will be decided based upon tens of thousands of votes in specific swing states. And the other issue with this lack of a policy platform is it leaves her very vulnerable to attacks from Donald Trump, because they can project any image onto her that they want, and she has no reasonable way to articulate a defense to them because she doesn't really stand for anything. With the Kamala Harris campaign is they seem to be very heavily relying on social media engagement as well as celebrity endorsements to create this sort of image of widespread popularity. The issue with using social media as a way to evaluate the current success of the Kamala Harris campaign is that social media metrics can be extremely inflated and very misleading, because a huge demographic on TikTok, for example, are people under the age of 18. They will not be voting, and it's also further inflated by the fact that many people on TikTok are in international countries who just enjoy watching the politics for the show of it, like me, but we will not be voting in the election, so it can lead her campaign to be in a place where they are overestimating their grassroots support, when in reality they don't have it because it doesn't really exist. So the danger is that this perceived popularity may not translate into actual votes, particularly in the swing states, which will be the deciding factors of this election. And her campaign's obsession with social media and viral moments and celebrity culture is further illustrated by the decisions they're making by having Megan Thee Stallion twerking on stage, or thinking it was a good idea to have Oprah Winfrey appear at the DNC talking about the middle class, because they clearly do not have an understanding that the average American and average person absolutely despises celebrities, does not want to be talked down to from them, and will not be voting based upon who they endorse. And I'll go even further that I think it does the complete opposite of what they're trying to accomplish. The mere presence of Oprah Winfrey will directly result in people voting against Kamala Harris because of how much people despise celebrity culture and despise billionaires like Oprah Winfrey and everything that she stands for. And if I was to summarize the core problem with the personal brand of Kamala Harris, and something that I think will continue to bubble underneath the surface of her campaign until it inevitably explodes, it is an authenticity issue. And the perfect example of this is the glaring contradiction of the fact that Kamala Harris is using TikTok as a way to influence young people to vote for her, to make it appear like she cares about their issues and that she hears them, when in reality she is part of the administration that introduced legislation to ban the app, which is the most insane violation of freedom of speech I have seen in my entire life. Does become president in November, come January, the app is set to be taken away from the App Store forever. They literally banned the app because of lobbying from Mark Zuckerberg, because instead of spending money on his own app improving Instagram, he would rather take out his competitor altogether. And because we have a completely corrupt government, he's able to do that. So I can't even imagine the fact that she's been able to run this campaign and has not been questioned about this glaring contradiction. And this brings us, of course, to the most obvious question, which is why hasn't she been questioned about this or really anything important? And the reason is that her campaign officials know that she has a historical tendency to say extremely stupid things and make very dumb gaffes when she goes off script. When she is reading off script, she is good, she is charismatic, she hits her points. When she is asked a question that is in any way she's unprepared to answer, she makes huge mistakes. Here are a few that she's done before. At one point, she said three times in three separate videos that 220 million Americans died from COVID. She obviously meant to say not that, because there's 300 million Americans. I think we would know if they all died from COVID. Another time, she was visiting the DMZ, which is the demilitarized zone in South Korea, and she praised the Republic of North Korea and said that she wanted to be allies with them, and she didn't realize Korea. And then she obviously says word salads a lot, where we don't understand the context of all in which she lives and where she came before her, pretend to be. One of my favorite quotes from her, she said, "It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time." And this is just the reality. She is not good speaking off the cuff. She knows it, and her campaign knows it. If you need further proof, let's watch how she answered a very simple question on inflation.
And also, what else are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with this. Prices have gone up. And families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up.
And the reason why I'm showing you this is so you understand the fragility of such a tightly controlled image when she is inevitably put into a high-pressure environment, like a debate or an interview where she has to answer questions and she can't articulate herself. This crafted idea that she's an extremely competent person gets shattered immediately. So if Kamala Harris really wants to win this election, she needs to radically and quickly move away from the superficial, hollow rhetoric that she's been engaging in and put together a substantial policy platform and articulate a very clear vision that she has for the country. If she does, I not only think she will win the presidency, but all three branches of government, potentially laying the groundwork for actual transformational change. And if she doesn't, I think she will simply become a cautionary tale of someone who sought the highest office in the land without actually fully grasping the weight of its responsibilities. And she also has to sit down for some press interviews because it's making her look very entitled that she received the nomination, not getting one vote, and won't even talk to the American people.
This is what happens when you give a white man a mic for too long. But I also had to admit that he's also correct. Some point where he misses, and then other points, fair enough, I understand. Before I give my whole opinion, I'm going to give people from the States to give their own perspective of how they view this whole situation, because he's a Canadian, I'm a South African, and it wouldn't make sense to start the whole conversation with just our own opinions, which quite frankly, they are really irrelevant. So let's kick in with the first video.
Why I was so annoyed by this video yesterday is because he uses the phrase objective analysis when he talks about his terrible opinionated video. Because objectivity implies no implicit racial, emotional biases present in the analysis. Analysis implying that he's taking data and he's analyzing it, but he doesn't do either of those things. The evidence he uses is just anecdotal, personal information that he's interpreting using his emotional, implicit, racial, white man, Canadian bias. And he did the one example I hate the most, which is the idea that black people only care about Kamala because she's going to be the first black female president. And he also starts the video off by talking about how, even though he's Canadian, he wants to make this video because he knows how important American politics are and how it affects the rest of the world. If it's so important, why didn't you bother learning about American politics before making the video? Why didn't you do a lick of basic research? And it bothers me to my core when I hear a white man say objectivity when they're talking about their stupid opinion. Because white men are some of the most hardest to understand other people's emotions, hardest to empathy, hardest to understand their own implicit biases, racial biases, emotional biases. So, of course, when this white man decides to go ahead and talk about it, it's something that it doesn't explain anything about Kamala. It just shows how he interprets Kamala and black people as a whole. And it's not good looking. It actually looks really bad. It looks like you have some huge anti-blackness to unpack. This type of arrogance is so typical in white men, and that's why it's dangerous to have white men ever at the forefront of any discussion and when it involves people of color, black people, marginalized groups in general, because white people, especially white men, have the hardest time building empathy, emotional bias deconstruction, implicit bias deconstruction, racial bias deconstruction. White men are the ones that have the most work to do, and they're always the ones that do the least while claiming the most. And I wouldn't even trust this guy's opinion even if he had a master's degree in American politics, because again, white men have the hardest time deconstructing, and they have the hardest time understanding that they have a lot of biases, and this video is a prime example of that.
Respectfully, I am also going to say I may not be fully informed about American politics, and it comes from a person who really, like he says, the Canadian guy. American politics really do affect the world, okay? And like you said as well, it is our responsibility as the people, if they interact and affect the world, interact whatever, then we should do our due diligence by investigating and knowing proper information. Firstly, let's look at Obama. When he was first brought into the scene, the world, we believe that as a first black man who's a president in America, he's going to bring change to the world. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. It seems like there was an empty board, and then what was marketed to people of America that was pushing this idea, the first black president, that's what we got from him. And then there was this blank thing. And then people just and then there were people behind him that were behind Obama putting things about what needs to be achieved. And they went good. They went good. Sure, there were things that he did that were good. But I think Kamala as well, like Obama, rides on being black. And that becomes her mojo. It may not be as you guys see it in the state, but we see it as like that outside of America. So I know that she uses her race to market herself, because there are things that she does. I look at her and I'm like, what is this woman doing? Obviously, I would not prefer her to Trump. It's like a double-edged sword at this point. I'm like, I would rather have her because, she's a woman. She's more likely to do things. But in government, come on, guys, let's be honest. Let's be honest here. Besides this whole debate, Canadian stuff, when has government ever implemented change? Through these people that they put on the board, whether change will never come, whether it's from her or from Donald. It's like, that's what I'm saying, it's like a double-edged sword. You have to choose your better devil, basically. The one that really, really works for you. But okay, let's expand it a little bit more and have it in a broader conversation.
I have like a 9.5 minute draft where I was like, if I were you, I would take this video down, which apparently now he has, but I still think we should talk about it. Because that video was not just a parade of ignorance about American politics, which it was. Not only was that video a fundamental misunderstanding of what it looks like to run as a pseudo-incumbent, a fundamental misunderstanding of the disconnect in the realities between a social media presence and campaigning, because those two things are not congruent and have not been the same for the entire time that Kamala Harris has been running. That video was sexist and racist and ignorant and ill-informed. Just a bevy of misinformation, a lack of research that was paraded around intellectualism under the guise of having a degree. And then giving a lot of caveats as to why we shouldn't have been listening to you in the first place. But that's part of it, is your entire platform is trying to prey on the downfall of people under the guise of having a marketing degree. One assertion you kept coming back to over and over again is that Kamala Harris does not have policy positions. And she does. She has firmly laid out those policy positions. She has policy positions on education. She has a policy position on healthcare. She has a policy position on housing. She has a policy position on taxes. She has a policy position on the economy. She's also running as a pseudo-incumbent. She is a part of the administration that is currently running. And so also on the whole idea of like, how can she possibly use TikTok? That was bipartisan. That was a bipartisan set of legislation. So it's not just she unilaterally made this decision. And that contradiction exists across every American politician. So let's just be clear. That is not a Kamala Harris exclusive thing to call her out for. But to suggest that she doesn't have policy positions is patently false, and also allows you to pivot to this ridiculous notion that her only shtick is her identity, and the only reason why people care about her is the identity politics of it. The wild part is Kamala Harris has done her darnest to not play up her identity in her campaign. Like, we are excited as Black people for a Black candidate. A lot of women are excited for a woman candidate. Black women in particular are excited, and the lack of grassroots support, as you put it, that she's too stupid to not know that the social media presence does not equal grassroots support. You also used a lot of language around how she wasn't smart enough, which is not even lightly veiled racism and sexism. But there were a series of events, Zoom calls, that were Black women for Harris, Black men for Harris, white women for Harris, white dudes for Harris, that not only raised millions of dollars in the course of a couple of hours, but also organized that grassroots support that you said did not exist. And then to suggest that she's not a good speaker or not competent enough to be able to put together a campaign strategy is once again not even lightly veiled racism and sexism. To question her authenticity is not even lightly veiled racism and sexism. You literally just parroted the talking points of right-wing grifters here in America. And you are a Canadian. You don't even go here. The entire video was a parade of white male privilege, ignorance, and what should be embarrassing behavior from a person who the outcome of this election will actually not impact. And at the end of the day, I'm glad you took the video down. You should be better. You should be embarrassed. And you should probably not speak about Kamala Harris ever again. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Like I said, it's a double-edged sword. And it's like, I would never really trust politicians, even in my own country, because there are a lot of people behind them. We see people in the front and we think they represent us, the people. I don't think it doesn't work. Even if she might have good intentions, politics, it just doesn't work for the good of the people. It never will. It's just that. For me personally, that's how I see it.
I have a degree in political science, a minor in campaign management, and for the last 4 years, I've been working in political organizing, advertising, and digital strategy. But I don't need any of those credentials to know that this video was devoid of all context, for lack of a better word, about who Kamala Harris is, her record, and the decisions her campaign is making. Before I dive in, critiquing a candidate or their campaign is fine to do, but this video is not based on a firm understanding of political strategy, and most of what he says is just flat out wrong. In this video, he claims that the current VP, former senator, former attorney general, former district attorney, is stupid when she speaks off script. He says that she has no policy agenda, her rhetoric is hollow, and that she's relying on superficial social media engagement and identity politics to win the election. That's just not true. I wish there was more education about this in general because it was very eye-opening to me when I entered this industry, but a lot of people don't realize what a political advertisement is versus like a video that shows up on their For You page. Political advertisements are very different and have very different strategy than what the Kamala HQ account is doing. Kamala HQ is run by a social media team who are very good at what they're doing, but they understand that their job is only to target people like me. I'm young, I'm progressive, I'm on TikTok, I'm in on the joke. Stuff that they're posting resonates with me, and they understand that. That's why the Kamala HQ account is only one facet of a vast media strategy the campaign is deploying. Really entire teams on the campaign that are in charge of producing paid media. They are in charge of forming coalitions across the country in important communities that they need to win. There's teams for fundraising, the people that send you all those emails, and there's teams for field organizing, the people that come knock on your door and call you a bunch to try to get you to vote. Like, the campaign is not posting a coconut meme and logging off for the rest of the day. Only analyzing her social media is not really seeing the big picture or even like more than a slice of the picture if you're trying to analyze her marketing strategy. Because yeah, the social media is great, but you forgot to mention that they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, a ton of which has come from first-time donors, people that didn't donate to Biden's campaign that have been solely excited by Kamala Harris and the vision that she has. Using that hundreds of millions of dollars to place TV and digital ads in states across the country with different targeted messaging for all the audiences they need to capture. They know the brat summer coconut joke is not going to resonate with a maybe rural white 50-year-old guy in Pennsylvania. That's why that guy will see 30 or 60-second TV ads talking about the success of the Biden-Harris Inflation Reduction Act, or something about her proposal to offer a tax credit to first-time home buyers. And he's thinking, wow, now my kid's gonna be able to afford a home. And you and I will see the femininomenon joke because that was meant for us. Yes, he didn't realize that because one, he is Canadian and they're not spending their advertising money in his media market. Thank goodness. That means their targeting is good. We've had organic organizing calls crop up with hundreds of thousands of people from like Black women for Harris, white dudes for Harris, Swifties for Harris, I think raised over $100,000 just the other day. And outside of her paid staff, there are hundreds of thousands of volunteers who have signed up, anything they can do to support her. Let's talk about his analysis that the campaign is also only running on identity politics and vibes, basically. Because to me, that's when the analysis really went off the rails. Because to believe this, you would have had to ignore every speech and every tangible piece of evidence that we can measure the success of campaigns by since her campaign launched just over a month ago. Not only has she laid out a very striking and interesting economic agenda for the future, she has very clear stances going way back on reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, education, tax fairness, corporate greed. Sure, it's part of the excitement that she is a historic candidate, but saying that she's only relying on identity politics is frankly sexist and feels like he doesn't even understand her entire picture as a candidate. The sentiment also ignores that for literally every election since the beginning of America, white men have used so-called identity politics to win elections. So talking down to people that are excited that a woman, a Black woman, a South Asian woman is running for president is condescending and fundamentally misunderstands what motivates people to actually vote. Two things can be true. People can be excited that she is a historic candidate and they can have an interest in her vision that she's laid out. Now, my last straw was him saying that she hasn't done the intellectual work in order to be ready to debate. Kamala Harris is a spectacular debater. Like, famously in 2020 during the primaries, her debate performance was so good that it put her at the top of the VP list, where as the nominee, she went on to absolutely cook Mike Pence. And here's just like a little piece of the reporting. According to a CNN instant poll of registered voters who watched the debate, Harris came out on top. 59% said that she won, while 38% thought that Pence triumphed. On Wednesday night, Harris spoke in Apparently America. Listen, Pence is about 1,000 times more coherent and relatable than Trump. When she's contrasted with Trump, who's been rambling on about Hannibal Lecter and wind turbines killing birds on a debate stage, it's not going to be hard for her to appear policy-oriented and intellectual. She can do that on her own, even with other more qualified candidates. This demeaning of her record also forgets that she has won almost every single election she's run in. If you actually do your research about her as a candidate historically, none of the claims he makes about her appearing stupid when she speaks off script, not having the intellectual prowess, and not having firm policy stances actually hold up. Let's be clear. Kamala Harris is the #2 most powerful political figure in the world. She understands the weight of the office, and her and everyone around her know what the stakes are of this election. That's why Harris is the nominee and not Biden, frankly. All reliable evidence that we have about campaign strategy, the fundraising numbers, the ad spending numbers, the number of volunteers, the number of grassroots engagement, etc., proves to her having a successful campaign. Not that her marketing strategy is horrible and she needs to rapidly change trajectory or she'll lose the election. These claims have no more substance than what they're saying on Fox News, essentially. And it's disappointing to see people parroting stuff and like doing the far right's work for them when they're not informed about the grassroots movement Harris has ignited. Basically, what I'm saying is that by every available metric, Kamala Harris is running an extremely successful campaign. And analysis to the contrary, especially analysis that doesn't include any evidence, is really the stuff that's just based on vibes.